Are you interested in integrating drones into your railroad business, or perhaps you are a service provider interested in using them? Perfect. Let's talk about it. We have this webinar designed specifically for you. My name is Jonathan Repack, and I am an aviation attorney. I'm Florida barred. I focus only on drone law. I'm a commercial pilot with current flight instructor certificates. I'm a professor at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. I co-authored American Bar Association legal treatise on unmanned aircraft. I have 4 clients, 60 night waiver approvals. That's 100% night waiver approval track record. On December the 31st, 2015, my firm was ranked second in the U.S. against other law firms for Section 333 exemption clients based upon regulations.gov on that particular date. Additionally, I also helped on the Taylor v. Huerta case. The books on the side there, the middle one and the bottom one were ones that I authored, and I co-authored the one at the top. So let's dive in. There is the outline of this webinar. We're going to talk first about the current commercial drone regulations and licensing requirements, where we came from, where we are, and then railroad use cases with their specific operational problems. Then we'll move on to future issues, and then knowing where we came from, where we currently are, where we're going, we're going to discuss integrating drones into a corporate environment, either for railroad companies or for service providers. There will be an article, video, and slides available at jrupracklaw.com/railroad drone. So let's talk about where we came from. From September 2014 going backwards, the real only way to kind of get airborne was using the airworthiness certification process, coupled with a certificate of authorization. This was somewhat expensive, and very few people could even get into this realm. The only way people were actually flying aircraft at this time was with what's called a special airworthiness certificate. It's very difficult. Not too many people have gone through that process. But in September 2014, the FAA started granting Section 333 exemptions. And so that gave us another alternative to get the drones airborne than the airworthiness certificate plus the certificate of authorization. The Section 333 exemptions were easier to obtain and cheaper to obtain than the airworthiness certificate and certificate of authorization. Then in August 29th, 2016 to present, what we're in now, we can operate under Part 107. Part 107 is actually far cheaper than the Section 333 exemption method. Some of you might have heard that in order to fly commercially, you needed to have some type of pilot's license, and that was true under a Section 333 exemption. You needed to have a sport pilot's license or higher to fly, but with the creation of Part 107, you do get a pilot's license, but it's a remote pilot certificate. That's how most people are operating right now. It's far cheaper and quicker to obtain than a Section 333 exemption or an airworthiness certificate plus certificates of authorization. So that's where we came from. Now, where are we currently located in the regulatory scheme? This slide and a few of the others are only going to be talking about the federal aviation regulations. There are other laws that may apply. Please keep this in mind. So this is not a comprehensive list of what you can and cannot do. This is merely the highlights of Part 107, and additionally, from the federal aviation regulations, there are other ones that could apply to your situation. So in order to fly under Part 107, you would obtain a remote pilot certificate with a small UAS rating. So for first-time pilots, you pay $150. You take an initial knowledge exam. Once you pass that background check from the TSA and that also that knowledge exam, you'll get a temporary certificate online, and then you can operate under that certificate, your remote pilot certificate, as long as it's current, which is for a period of 2 years. If you are a current pilot, okay, like, a manned aircraft pilot, a sport pilot or higher, you can take an online training course on the FAA's website for free and show that you're current. You file some paperwork and you'll receive your temporary Part 107 certificate online. You'll eventually in the mail receive your hard copy. But those are the 2 different ways you can actually go and get airborne for low cost and quickly under Part 107. And so once you obtain this remote pilot certificate, you operate within Part 107. It has a list of operational regulations, but keep in mind, there are other regulations, even including inside the federal aviation regulations, that apply to your flight. So this is not a complete, comprehensive webinar. This is just merely giving you some of the highlights. So you operate within Part 107. except for a few instances where in Part 107 it references outside regulations, such as in Part 91 with the TFRs, which are temporary flight restrictions. Now, if you cannot do your operation under Part 107, well, what the FAA did was build into the regulations what's called regulatory flexibility, and it gives us tools in order to accomplish the mission, because you can't create one size fits all for the regulations. The way to actually get airborne in these weird oddball situations is with authorizations, waivers, and if you can't do it with an authorization or a waiver, your fallback is with an exemption. So with Part 107, you cannot take off with an aircraft weighing 55 pounds or more, but if you obtain a Section 333 exemption, you can go over that weight limit. You cannot fly at night unless you obtain a waiver or an exemption for that. You cannot operate over people, but that is waivable. You cannot operate over moving vehicles, but that is waivable. You cannot operate from a moving aircraft. You cannot operate in Class Bravo, Charlie, Delta, or Echo at the surface airspace unless authorized or waived. And what's interesting here is many people said you can't fly near airports. Well, that's not true, because Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and Echo at the surface airspace is airspace normally associated with much more busy types of airports with IFR type, instrument flight rules traffic that is talking to ATC, but there are many Class G airports all over the United States, and you can actually fly near those much more easily now than with the Section 333 exemptions. The regulations provide that you just do not interfere with traffic, you give way to aircraft, and you do not operate in a careless and reckless manner near those Class G airports. So mentioning regulatory flexibility before and just bringing up this issue now of regarding airports, well, what happens if we need to fly at a Bravo, Charlie, Delta, or Echo at the surface type of airspace? Well, we have two methods currently. We have what we've been using for a while now is the FAA's portal method, and also what just came online here recently, which is LAANC, which is the Low Altitude Authorization and Notification Capability. LAANC is great if you're wanting to do short, simple, small area flights that are not close to airports and not involving waivers. But if you're wanting to fly near an airport or with some type of waivers involved, then you're going to need to go the FAA portal method and obtain a COA, a certificate of authorization, that way. Keep in mind also LAANC is only at certain airports in certain states. So if you look here on the left-hand side, you have it's a total of 49 airports are included in this program. They'll eventually start expanding as time goes out, but you can see it's only for those listed states. Minnesota has quite a few, Florida has one, Kentucky one, Arizona one. So it's not all over the United States, it just covers certain airports, and you can see a large majority of them, 40 of them here on the right hand side in that graph, are Class Echo airspace. There's 3 Bravos, 4 Charlies, 2 Deltas, and 40 Echoes. Keep in mind this will be expanding as time goes on. The other method, then the LAANC system, and this is when you want to do waiver type of operations or close to airports, or maybe longer term you want to have something very like rock solid, because with a LAANC system you could potentially have some issues where they get rejections. LAANC is, with the portal method, it's a little bit more concrete because you have a piece of paper saying you can fly there, and then you just get notified via a telephone number that you give them. In the event that they have some issues, they call you. Chances of them happening, that's pretty slim at the moment. I've never actually heard of it happening. But what was interesting regarding the FAA portal method is from September 2016 to July 2017, the FAA mentioned that the agency received 20,566 authorization requests, and that the FAA has processed 14,334 of those and continues to have about 6,000 in the backlog. And so as time goes on, they're predicting that it's going to go up to about 25,000 pending authorizations. So the portal method is you really only need to do it when you need to do it, because it will take some time to get those approvals. The time frame on those is typically around like 6 months, but they were recently have been granting them all the way out till it was the last day in June. They'll probably start rolling it out, so maybe last day in July, and keep going further out as time goes on. Now that's for authorizations when you want to operate in Bravo, Charlie, Delta, or Echo at the surface airspace. But if you're wanting to do something completely outside of that, or maybe even with outside of the waivers, you need to go the exemption method. And there have been a few of these that have been filed after Part 107 has come out. There's only been, I think, a few that have been granted. Most of them have been denied. I was actually, there's one company that does a lot of drone consulting work, and actually they received a bunch of denials here just recently, which was really interesting. But not much happening in regards to the exemptions here recently. The FAA is pretty much trying to force everyone to go with authorizations or waivers. So regarding waivers, this is currently where we're at. The most popular night waiver that has been approved and actually requested is the night waiver. There has been 1,201 approvals as of November the 6th. So it's 1,201 out of 1,354. Very popular. Some of the more rare ones would be the beyond line of sight. 7 waivers were approved for that out of 1,354. And there has been 6 for over people. But what's really interesting, it's not really 6. There was 3 just for CNN, 2 for a company that was purchased by FLIR, and 1 for Google. So outside of night, it becomes much more difficult to obtain a waiver. And so we can see also here on the bottom left side, this is the number of waivers that have been filed to October the 31st. There's 4,739 filed since January the 1st, and the FAA has only approved 808 of those. So it's a 17% approval rate for those. The FAA has become, they're making people be held to aircraft standards. That's probably the better way to put it. And you can also see the trend of approvals here on the right hand side with the dates. So the peak time frame was around April of 2017, and then it started declining after that. So overall rate, 17% has been approved. Keep that in mind in regards to if you're ever thinking about hiring any consultants or attorneys to work with, because a large majority of these people have been shot down. You want to ask what their track record is. Currently, my night waiver track record is 100% out of 60. Many of you have been hearing on the news about President Trump's Drone Innovation Pilot Program and are wondering, can we benefit from this? There's been a lot of hype regarding this pilot program, a lot of excitement, but what is really going on underneath? Well, the pilot program will actually be using the same regulatory flexibility methods that I just previously discussed, the waivers, the authorizations, and exemptions. So if you think this is something new, it's not. It's just going to be, it's really just a repackaging of what we currently have. So if you're having problems with getting to the waiver, authorization, and exemption process, you're going to end right back up where you started from. Now, there's also no money in the preparation of an application to become one of these applicants or participants of the pilot program, and there's actually no money for the execution of the program. There are many reporting requirements. You have to also be paired up with a state, local, or tribal government. That causes also additional headaches, right? Because you have to deal with everything they have to deal with. There will also be some emphasis on working with selected applicants, so that's a plus there, but it is unclear if this will actually make a real difference in speeding things up. Also, the real important part here is this sunsets after 3 years, so the waivers, authorizations, and exemptions we just talked about, you're going to have those in place in 3 years because this is all going to sunset. So now let's talk about railroad use cases with their specific operational problems. We have corridor inspections you can do for hazards or vegetation. The problems here is that the big problem here is with under Part 107, you must be line of sight of that aircraft. There are 2 ways you can get around that. You can do beyond visual line of sight or extended line of sight flying, but you're going to have a waiver for that. That would be a solution to the problem of being within line of sight at all times. Additionally, if you're flying in, all the time, you need to be keeping in mind that there is a visibility requirement of 3 statute miles. Also, that the clouds, they have to be at least 500 feet above your aircraft. So keep that in mind. You might need a waiver for that depending upon the environments that you're doing this. And lastly, and the most common, right, is going to be airspace. Are you flying in Bravo, Charlie, Delta, or Echo at the surface airspace for these trying to identify these hazards of these vegetation? Then you're going to need an authorization or a waiver for that. Or you could potentially just go, through the Lance method, which is an authorization. Okay, it's a much more rapid authorization, so you might need a combination of all 3 of those. Now, you can also do site surveys, you can do mapping. The problems with any type of site surveys or mapping of like a larger area is you have the line of sight issue. So it's extended line of sight or beyond line of sight. Yeah, so waivers, you can obtain those and you can be able to fly much further if needed. Additionally, if there's also people in the area that you're trying to survey or map, you cannot be flying over people or moving vehicles. So regarding the over people, many people are kind of asking the question like, well, what if they're employees of the company or a subcontractor or something like that, and they're wearing hard hats? Or what if we have some sign out that says, like, hey, if you're flying in this area, you give consent for us to fly over. None of those are going to work, guys. The FAA allows for flying directly over participating people. Okay, there's only 4 types of people in that category. That would be the remote pilot in command, the visual observer, the person manipulating the controls, and the 4th person is a person necessary for the safety of the flight. Not somebody you need to have there to complete the mission, or it just so happens to be working in the area. It's somebody necessary for the safety of the flight. And there's going to be quite a few people that do not fall into that category, so you need to keep that in mind. If you're going to be flying over the non-participants, such as employees of the company or subcontractors, stuff like that, that are not necessary for the safety of the flight, not a remote pilot in command, not a visual observer, and not to manipulate the controls, then you might need a waiver to fly over people directly. Now, keep in mind, you can get around that just by never flying directly over people, right? So you maybe fly it off times when people are not around, maybe on the weekends or however. You can just be creative and figure out how to do that and just scheduling as opposed to actually going through those hurdles. Additionally, you might also need to obtain an Airspace Authorization waiver or the portal route, or you can go the Lance route with the Airspace. Keep in mind that I also was saying before about the Lance system. It's for simple type of operations where there's no waivers involved. When you are going to be flying under some type of waiver, so let's say night, for instance, in Bravo, Charlie, Delta, or Echo at the surface, you can obtain an authorization to exercise the privileges of your waiver, because the waivers kind of come stock for just 107, like the straight up non-waivable type of flying. So if you want to fly at night, you need to specifically get one for that, which does take longer, and you can't go the Lance method for that. So keep that in mind when you are doing waiverable, the waiver type of operations in controlled airspace. You're going to have to obtain authorizations or waivers for that, specifically listing those type of operations. You can also use a drone in the event of some type of a derailment, or you have a hazmat spill situation. You need to identify rapidly which of the the portions that were damaged, right? What chemical is it? You need to get over there and quickly identify it, right? A drone's pretty cheap compared to some of those hazmat suits. So the idea would be then you'd fly the drone over to identify that chemical and then bring it back, right? And just throw it in a trash bag and contain it that way, as opposed to using an expensive suit. And it's actually much quicker to do that. So you can kind of rapidly contain the situation, especially if, right, if there's a situation with like chlorine gas or something, you need to evacuate people downwind. That would be very important for rapid response. Now, the issues here is with accidents, right? When do they happen? When you probably don't want them to happen, at night, in low cloud situations, low visibility situations. You might also need to call in a TFR, or there might be a TFR already called in. So TFR is a temporary flight restriction, and so you might need to, in regards to thinking about your overall plans, how are you going to interact with the disaster response type of groups of people in your geographical area? How are you going to be doing that? The first responders, interacting with them and responding to the TFRs. Another use is for inventory management or for security of the rail cars at certain locations. One thing there I see as a problem is typically when you're storing a lot of these cars in an area, or kind of holding it until it takes off, you hook up another train and go to another area. They tend to be around cities where there are a lot of airports. So you're back to the overall airspace situation. Additionally, if you're going to be doing security, you might need to be doing flying at night, low cloud visibility, those type of situations. So you might need to obtain those type of waivers. Bridge and infrastructure inspections. Primary problem there would be going back to the airspace issues. And if you want to use some of your drones for kind of like a nice side thing, you can also use the same drones for marketing purposes. So if you have some type of marketing department that needs to create some pretty pictures, right, for the website or whatever, you could possibly use your drones to get a lot of pictures there. Now, you remember, you can't go flying over people unless you obtain a waiver for that. And generally, it's just easier to don't fly over people and, you know, create the situation however you need to without flying over the people. So we just talked about the railroad use cases with their specific operational problems. We're going to now dive into some of the future issues. So remember where we came from, you know, where we are, and then currently, you know, where we're going, and then we're going to be discussing integrating drones into the corporate environment. That's where you guys are going to see why I brought up the where we were, where we are, and where we're going, so you can make the best decision for your company. Future rulemakings. So regulations, when they're created, they go through the rulemaking process, and it's a lengthy process. And on the next slide, I'll show you kind of what the overall process looks like. And there are currently a couple different regulations that the FAA is working on trying to get out. You have the over people operations that you might have heard about. You also have the beyond line of sight operations, or maybe extended line of sight. We don't really fully know exactly what the FAA has in mind there. Night operations. And the FAA is also going to have to update their Part 48 registration regulations. So I do know the over people operations, those were moving around, and last I heard they were at the Office of Management budget, but when President Trump took over, what ended up happening is it got kicked back to the FAA, so they're currently working on it right now. The FAA did move on the Part 48 registration requirements, and they did move them forward. So they're currently at the DOT's office, and the DOT is looking at that. It's the Department of Transportation. They might move it on. Now, what's interesting playing into this whole situation is that the President Trump issued it was an executive order regarding it's a 2-for-1 deal. There's one that's one, and then you also have this issue where everything that was pending in the overall regulatory process has to go back to its agency head for approval. The other situation that's going on is that President Trump issued this order regarding the 2-for-1 deal on regulations, meaning that for every one regulation that is going out, 2 regulations need to be repealed. So keep that in mind when you're looking at this overall situation, which is that, 2 or 1? No, it's 3. You're going to have to do rulemaking, because the same process has to be followed for getting rid of regulations at the same time for putting one out. So what you're doing is actually increasing the amount of manpower needed to actually get this all done. And under the Administrative Procedures Act, which is what you have to follow, unless you want to get involved in a lawsuit and have it overturned, which just actually happened here recently with the Taylor case, the Administrative Procedures Act issues were all brought up, but the court only ruled on one of the issues. They didn't get to the Administrative Procedures Act rules, but FAA almost got that all slammed down just because of they violated the Administrative Procedures Act. So they're going to be very cognizant of not breaking those laws, and so all of the regulations being repealed, they have to go that same route, and it takes generally on average from start to finish about 3 years. The FAA also has a regulatory kind of bandwidth of how many rulemakings they can actually go on at any moment. It's around 8 to 16. So you're not going to have too many going out. And drones in the overall grand scheme of things aren't that important. So you're not going to be seeing too much in the regards to future rulemakings coming out anytime soon. That's the overall effect of I'm trying to make all this with all this these hurdles, is that if you're wanting to do beyond visual line of sight, night, over people operations, anything like that, you're going to be doing that under Part 107 waivers for the next couple of years. There's not going to be any type of regulation that you can operate under coming up. So what we have is pretty much what you got right now. This is a picture of the overall rulemaking process. So you can kind of see here that it starts off inside the FAA right here. Unless there's some type of external source over here that'll cause pressure, such as when the FAA is being told by Congress or by the president to go and do something, then something over here tells the FAA to start the rulemaking process. So what happens is the FAA starts doing stuff internally, and then they draft a proposed rule. They send it over, and eventually the head of the FAA signs off on it, and then gets sent over to the Office Secretary of Transportation and the Department of Transportation, okay, to get reviewed. They sign off on it, send it to the Office of Management and Budget, and then if they sign off on it, then it gets published in the Federal Register as a proposed rule. Then we get to comment on it, okay? Then, everyone gets to say, this is great, I don't like it, whatever. Then what happens is that the FAA has to go back through and read all of those comments, analyze, properly respond to it. They approve it internally within the FAA, send it over to the Office Secretary of Transportation, then send it over to Office Management Budget, and then if they get through all of these approvals here, then they publish it as a final rule to go into effect. So, I mean, the average is around 3 years from start to finish. Keep in mind, Part 107 was originally started in 2009, but did not actually go into effect until August the 29th, 2016. So this can take a while. So if you're going to do anything like night, beyond visual line of sight, over people, anything like that, you're going to go the waiver route. Now, here's some future case law that potentially might affect things. So there was the Taylor v. It's really Huerta case, but I put Taylor v. FAA because most people understand that, because most people are like, who's Huerta? Well, Huerta is the administrator of the FAA. So Taylor sued Huerta in the DC Circuit Court of Appeals, and there was actually a total of 4 cases that were filed. So the first 3 were ruled upon. You might have seen all over the news where the FAA's drone registration requirements were struck down as being illegal by the DC Circuit Court of Appeals. Well, there's a 4th case no one's really talking about, and that is where the Taylor is basically saying, hey, FAA, Part 101, the regulations that you created are actually violating some other provisions of congressional law here that was passed, and you knew better. And based upon the previous ruling, there's a good chance that the FAA will lose at this point here, and that the FAA will then need to update Part 101 of their regulations. So really what this does is it means it's just another thing on the FAA's to-do list that they need to do. Because remember Part 48 that I mentioned before, that was all fine and created, except they did it in the incorrect way, and they did it to a group of protected people, and it was struck down. So the FAA really created a problem that they didn't really need to, because they didn't follow the law. Now, there's another case brewing here. It's Singer versus the City of Newton. This was filed in the District Court of Massachusetts, but it has been since appealed to the First Federal Circuit Court of Appeals. And what's interesting there is that the City of Newton created this local drone ordinance. And Singer challenged it, and the Federal District Court actually struck it down as saying it was conflict preempted. And so I guess the benefit to this is that it does potentially prevent other states, towns, and counties from creating some of these like local drone laws, at least from the district court ruling. If this the actual circuit court rules the same way, it'll be binding upon Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, and have a much more deferential kind of argument to other circuits and other federal district courts, and potentially if you will, prevent other states, towns, and counties from creating any drone laws in this area, which at the end of the day, that's all annoying when you're actually trying to operate business, because you end up having like 4 layers of laws you have to comply with, and everybody's using different terms and different regulations or ordinances, whatever you want to call them, and it becomes a nightmare after a while to try to comply with all of that. Now, we talked about the regulations, the future case law. Now we're going to get into kind of future federal law that might be coming down the pike here. So the FAA's federal its funding runs out on March the 31st, 2018, and so you might have all heard about the reauthorization that was getting discussed, and there was privatization of ATC. Well, these are things that are all kind of looming out there that are going to potentially come back up here in March 31st. So some of these things that might be getting included would be air traffic control privatization, which would possibly result in the shifting of the cost to drone operators to pay for some of this the operation of the air traffic control, because at the end of the day, there's a whole bunch of heads there, if you will, that can pay for that. They might not be using as much of the airspace, but there's a lot of people that don't want to be paying that. They'd rather shift it over to the drone industry, or people wanting, so that affects people that do use drones. Now, there are also people that are pushing their products. They're trying to, if you will, create regulatory requirements that are it creates a need for a product that people wouldn't already purchase. So kind of keep that in mind. So these things here are not going to create any like immediate type of things that you need to comply with, but it's going to get the ball rolling on future rulemaking. So as I mentioned before on that graph, that Congress sometimes says, hey, FAA, we want you to start doing rulemaking on this. So whatever happens around March 31st, we might see something that would maybe get the ball rolling and then go into effect about 3 years after that. So that's where we were. And then we discussed where we are, and then, you know, we talked about, you know, going forward. So, you know, how does this work for putting the pieces together of where we're going, I guess, is if you need to operate over people, night, at, or beyond visual line of sight, you need to get a waiver now because there's no changes for the next couple of years. The waivers last for 4 years. If you need to operate near an airport commercially, you should seriously start thinking about doing the authorizations now. They take a while to do. The automated system with Lance is great, but it's only at 49 airports. It will take some time to kind of scale out over time. Regarding federal law, I don't think there's going to be any type of preemption in there where it stops the states, towns, and counties from creating any type of drone laws. That's very controversial. I don't think that'll happen. The most likely thing where you would have to kind of rescue yourself is where if you could spend some of your dollars to lobby your state lawmakers to create some state preemption laws. So Florida, Maryland, Virginia, they all have, even Connecticut has state laws preempting the localities from creating any type of drone law. So it makes it a lot easier to operate, you know, so that way you only have to deal with the federal government in 50 states as opposed to, you know, how many different towns and counties and cities out there that are going to cause all sorts of ruckus. And lastly, start thinking about companies that they're going to start trying to push the regulatory changes to create regulatory needs, which their product would then fulfill. So that's another aspect here. So that might end up costing you a little bit more operationally. But it's a potential, but it hasn't been solidified. But that's what I'm seeing some of these underlying currents going on. So let's talk about integrating drones into the corporate environment. So here's a helpful way to kind of conceptualize the 5 main areas. So you have operations, you have aircraft, your pilots, your operating manuals, and then legal. You want to put all those together, and they're going to come together to create your overall integration in your for your company. Now with operations, you want to there's a whole bunch of different ways there you can break it down. So you have internal, which is, you know, the training aspect. Are you going to be training your guys internally? You're going to be outsourcing it. You're going to be keeping inside. Do you have a chain of command? What's the communications tree in regards to, you know, dealing with certain issues? For the flight operations procedures manual, now how are you going to be building those? Are you going to have just one super one? Are you going to have like kind of a modular system that you're going to kind of add on to that? And also another thing to keep in mind here is with the flight operations procedures manual, some of the waivers require that you have certain types of, if you will, if this, then that type of operational mitigations for certain types of risks. Like night would be a great example, where in the event of this, you know, then visual observer or the remote pilot would do this. You would outline all of that in a flight operations procedures manual to be reviewed prior to a flight. Are you going to be doing post-flight checklists? Are you going to be collecting certain types of data? And the data that you collect, are you going to be monitoring over time for you know, trends to see if there's anything going on there that you need to correct? Are there any new hazards that are developing that you need to properly address? You know, do you need to eliminate it, mitigate it, or outsource that? And now with external, how are you going to be interacting with everyone else with your drones? So you might have a flight department in your company, or you might want to keep create a completely brand new part of the company, its own like drone department. If you're a larger company that has multiple, companies that you own, are you going to have one drone program in each and every one of them, or are you going to have one drone company that maybe everybody hires, right? And so then you just kind of keep it within house and you just do it that way. There's a bunch of different issues there. And when you're doing that, you just want to think this out carefully in regards to your overall legal roadmap. So where are you going with the waivers? Where are you going with the training? All those things need to be built so that it can survive regulatory scrutiny as well as any potential lawsuits that come down the pike. Now, the data you're collecting, are you going to be integrating it overall with the safety management system? Do you need to create one? Do you already have one? How are you going to do this? Is it going to be a centralized setup, or is it going to be a decentralized setup? Now, is it built to scale, maybe even globally, or is it just going to be kept in one kind of geographical area? These are areas in regards to your questions in regards to your operations you need to address before you move further. Now, with aircraft, well, what type of aircraft are you going to be using? Fixed, a rotary, mission specific? Do you have any accessories that you need to have for that? I would highly suggest that you should go with the minimum amount of aircraft that you need, just one type of airframe, maybe two, because it starts becoming more and more difficult as time goes on. And interesting question there is, how do you actually phase in newer aircraft, right? So let's say everybody purchased the Phantom 4. Well, you're running the Phantom 3. When do you switch over to the Phantom 4? Right? Do you just everybody jump over to Phantom 4? Do you go, hey, we'll upgrade a quarter of the fleet, and then we'll quarter of the fleet next month, and then that way, if there's any problems that that pop up using the Phantom 4, we only kind of catch it with so much of our fleet, not the entire thing. And maybe we have a fallback. You keep the aircraft around for a little while, and then eventually sell them all off or scrap them. So you need to think about that. How do you go about actually updating the firmware? Because that could cause all sorts of crazy problems right there. Are you going to build an aircraft flight manual? Are you going to just use the aircraft, the one that came with the aircraft? Or are you going to develop your own proprietary one and then integrate it with your overall flight operations procedures manual? What about batteries? What are you planning on doing with actually storing your batteries? There's all sorts of issues there because they're hazardous material. These things will they can catch on fire and cause all sorts of ruckus. And let me guess, you probably kept them all together in some office somewhere that could catch on fire, or in some box somewhere. What if that vehicle that is transporting them somewhere, if that flips over and one of those things catches on fire? Do you have a way to actually kind of resolve that situation? Or what if when one of these batteries is charging, it catches on fire? Is that maybe one reason why you do battery charges, charging of them only at certain locations, under certain conditions, to the people that are actually going out to the field? Do they have a proper fire extinguisher to put out a chemical fire, or maybe just an ABC type of fire extinguisher so as to put out the fire that is caused by the actual battery, but kind of let the battery burn? Maintenance. Are you just going to buy a new one every time something happens? Well, if something happens, what is enough to actually happen before you buy a new one? Or are you going to repair? And how do you know it's actually a proper repair? What happens when you repair it and it crashes? You need to think all of this out. These are some questions this is why you need to bring in people that are very competent in regards to legal analysis, as well as regarding aircraft operational characteristics and integrating that, as well as with training. Now, with the pilots, are you going to have a pure in-house situation? Are you going to outsource? Are you going to have a mixed situation? Are they going to be full-time pilots or dual use, right? Are they going to be doing kind of one thing and then the other? So you kind of have this issue where they might not be that current or proficient. How do you keep them proficient? Are you, with standards, are you going to create hours, or are you going to create cycles? Currency, is it going to be once a month, twice a month, or every so many flights? Or how are you planning on doing that? The standards going to be based upon environmental conditions, right? So, hey, these guys over here that fly a lot in the mountains, they've been kind of trained on that. These guys fly at night. These guys fly in urban conditions. Are you going to create kind of specific environmental standards? With the 107 waivers, for instance, you are actually required to have specific type of training given to the remote pilots as well as the visual observers. Great example of that is with the night waivers. I actually created a night waiver training course specifically for this, is because many of my clients were asking about the night waivers. So individuals need to be trained on physiological conditions which degrade night vision, the visual illusions. You need to document all of this and have it available if you're operating under waivers, so that the FAA could audit you. And what are they looking for? Those are all things you need to keep in mind when dealing in this area. Quality controls. Are you going to be doing it in-house or having third-party outsiders coming in to vet you guys? So at some point, there's going to be a crash. Well, what are your FAA reporting requirements? And additionally, you also have to report under certain conditions to other agencies, and you might need to so as to be given a certain type of immunity. Also, if you're working with a in-house counsel, then you need to figure out your overall game plan regarding attorney-client privilege and the communications with everybody who is involved in the actual incident. You have an incident response plan. What about what happens when a FAA investigation happens, or there actually is a prosecution? These are all reasons why it would be wise to outsource to an attorney that deals in this area as opposed to having your legal counsel, right? Your in-house counsel that typically does not do this, work on it. And I would highly suggest that if you guys do have attorneys that you're working with that say they can do this, really kind of push back and ask them like, well, what makes you think that you're actually competent to do this? Because a lot of people think they are, but in reality, they aren't that proficient at it because it's such a weird area of the law. You want to find somebody that does that all day, every day. You don't ask your attorney to go and try to fix, maybe the motor vehicle, right? Why would you ask them to go over and start dealing with drones and some issues that they have no clue about? Additionally, also trying to get answers to some of these questions in regards to like operations, it might be quicker and easier to just pay for 15, 20, 30 minutes to hire them to get you some rapid answers so you can kind of move on with things as opposed to, hey, let's send Bob over in the legal department to go try to get the answer, and he's going to do what? Look around on the internet to then maybe call the FAA, who might get back so many days later with a maybe okay answer. It's better to just deal with somebody who does this all the time. Now, manuals. Going back to the waivers, you're going to have manuals designed for the more higher end type of waivers. Now with night waivers, you do not need a specific type of night manual like that you actually have to submit, but you're going to have certain type of operational mitigations that everyone's going to have to be familiar with. And the best way to everyone be familiar with it is to memorialize it in actual text format in a manual. So you definitely want to do that. You're going to have a FOPM, a Flight Operations Procedures Manual for each and every waiver, or you're just going to have like a super one, right? The maintenance manuals, are you just replacing, repairing, going back to that whole issue there? And aircraft flight manuals, do you have a pre and post flight checklist that you need to be checking for so you can try to identify any hazards before they happen, right? So you can nip the lawsuit in the bud before it actually, happens. Now, I raised a ton of questions right there, right? So those 5 slides raised a whole bunch of issues, and you guys are probably wondering, wow, this is a bunch with things we need to talk about. And you might be overwhelmed. Here's a suggestion. This is what I would suggest for you to do, a game plan going forward here so you can actually get something done rapidly for a low cost. What ends up happening, I've seen in most of these like kind of larger companies, there's typically, one person or a giant group of people that have been kind of designated to do the drone integration. With the larger group, what I've seen it happens is these people don't really know what's going on. Everybody's just basically mediocre and noobish at best, and everyone's pretty much just mediocre. And then what happens is they all go around on the internet searching for stuff, running all over the FAA's website, and they come back with an okay understanding of this, and they end up wasting collectively a lot of the company's time. So if you have 5 people on a committee and they have an hour-long meeting, you just wasted 5 hours of human capital, time capital right there, that cannot be taken back. And so larger companies especially need to be very aware of this. They might need to appoint 1 or 2 people to actually get this program done rapidly. And I would suggest, get someone in charge, then give them $1,000 to $1,500. Okay. Then you identify 3 to 5 of the best experts in their respective areas, and you hire them for 1 hour. Now, you want to send them a quick fact sheet of your ideas, kind of what you guys do, and maybe what you're thinking about doing. And then what you do is you have them all get on the phone with you, have a conference call, and you just listen. Don't talk. Let them all talk and kind of brainstorm and come up with the ideas for you. And if you have any questions at the very end, you ask those questions regarding the issues that I raised in the previous slide. So, hey, what would you guys recommend in regards to the this training manual thing? What should we do there? Or waivers? Should we do this, or authorizations? What about our storage of batteries? What should we do there? Then you're going to hear some really good responses. Record that, and you're going to be far, far more ahead of this than if you guys were to just try to figure it out on your own. And you're not out that much money, and you're not out that much time. Then you got to figure out from there, you do a quick cost benefit analysis of, do you hire the expert, or do you just do it completely in-house? And when you are kind of evaluating that, take an honest inventory of your current in-house capabilities, especially attorneys. I've seen this multiple times where the very arrogant attorney will be like, we can do it. And then all of a sudden it just disappears into a black hole, never to be seen from again. And you're like, hey, what's going on? What's going on? And that's what happened. They don't know, and they're fishing around, emailing the FAA and spinning their wheels and wasting time. So once you have that, you then figure out, what are you going to do? Are you going to do it in-house? Are you going to hire the expert? And then you just move forward. You have a game plan at that point. Now, when you are trying to identify those 3 or five individuals that you're going to be working with, I would highly take to just consider what I'm about to tell you right now from being in this industry for a while. So whenever you're dealing with experts, attorneys, or consultants, please do a background check on them, and additionally check out their credentials. There are many posers and liars out there that have run into this area to make a quick buck. I mean, there's some that have no experience in the area, and they're just trying to find somebody so that they can basically have them pay for the education. There's multiple people with criminal records in this area that I know of. There are multiple attorneys in this area. They call themselves attorneys, but they are not actually attorneys. There's one individual who is actually a disbarred attorney. So when he says he's an attorney, well, yeah, he's a disbarred attorney. He's not a real attorney. He got disbarred for some improper conduct. And so you want to look them up in their state bar. Find out where they are actually physically located. So if they are located in, like let's say the state of Florida, look them up in the Florida bar. If their name is not there and they call themselves an attorney, you have to ask some serious questions. Like, well, why do you call yourself an attorney and yet you are not licensed? Additionally, you also have multiple consultants and these non-attorneys. They're doing legal work. They're advising people specifically on the law and the consequences of not following the law. And this is actually committing the crime of the unlicensed practice of law. So it doesn't look too good on you when people start asking questions, or specifically people in the legal department are asking questions. Hey, such and such is an attorney. And then they come to find out that that's not an attorney. That looks really bad on you. Additionally, when you deal with attorneys, you have this thing called an attorney-client privilege, which is very important so you can have a frank and honest conversation with your attorney to ask questions like, hey, was this illegal? We did this. Is that wrong? And then it's like, hey, yeah, that's fine. Or, oh, don't do that again. Don't mention anybody. That was really bad. You need to have an attorney to deal with when you do that, because the attorney-client privilege protects the communication. There is no consultant-client type of privilege, which means that the FAA, a clever personal injury attorney or a prosecutor, right, is going to use that to their advantage by subpoenaing the consultant to testify against you. That causes all sorts of problems there. If you are looking at someone, ask about their track record, and also talk to their previous clients. Find out if they have any type of insurance. A lot of these guys are fly by night. They don't have insurance, or they can't obtain any type of insurance because of what their conduct is. And also find out totally how many clients have they helped. So I hope this gives you an idea of kind of how to integrate, based upon where we were and where we are currently, where we're going. Okay, brought up those 5 issues. You definitely want to go back and look at those 5 slides. Now, remember, this video and the slides, as well as an article, are all going to be located on my website. And you're going to see the article right here. It's going to be at jruprechtlaw.com/railroad-drone. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or call me.